Hello, my name is Jordan Reynolds and you're watching Sporting Icons.
Chris Eubank Jr. versus Marcus Morrison. And I think most of us expected Chris Eubank Jr. to go out there and pretty much just annihilate Marcus Morrison. I think it'd be fair to say that most of us thought that is exactly what was going to happen. Did that happen? I mean, kind of. In some ways, yes, it did. Except for the fact that Chris Eubank Jr., and you could see that, especially in round number 2, wanted to get the rounds in. You could see that. Because, right, firstly, round number 1, nothing to talk about with that one. That was just a very, very dull affair. But round number 2, Chris Eubank Jr., with about a minute to go in round number 2, he had Marcus Morrison on the ropes and was unloading on him, and then decided to stop throwing punches and just step backwards. Give Marcus Morrison a bit of a breather. And he was saying, well, come on. Chris Eubank Jr. clearly wanted the rounds, and I think everybody could see that. It was blatantly obvious that's what it was that he was doing. And at no real point in the fight did he really put his foot on the gas to actually try and get him out of there. He put a few combinations together, a few flurries here and there for sure, but you could see that he was just trying different things. So even by round 5, you could see that this fight was probably going to go the distance of the 10 rounds. Now, after the fight, he did say that that was, in fact, on purpose. He wanted the rounds, firstly, because he's been out of action for quite some time, so of course he wanted to get a feel for the ring again. But also, he wanted, after each round, to go back to his corner for his new trainer in Roy Jones Jr. Get used to having those instructions and trying the different things that these guys have been working on during camp and just regular training, that I suppose. So it is what it is. Now, don't get me wrong, Chris Eubank Jr., while he dominated the entire fight, it was a case of Marcus Morrison. He did land a couple of peat shots. He really did, especially like the right hook. Whenever they went in for like a bit of a trade, when Marcus Morrison did actually trade back, he was landing some pretty good shots on Chris Eubank Jr. But, of course, we always know Chris Eubank has a very, very good chin. Now, as far as his performance goes, you could see in the opening round, it was like a calmer version of Roy Jones Jr. That's what it was. You could see just the way he was standing there and just rocking his shoulders, the way he was just tilting his head, the way he had his hands up and that at times. It was Roy Jones Jr. He had the movement. He was replicating Roy Jones Jr. But, of course, to get it all completely right, that's probably going to take a couple of fights, isn't it? Of course it is. But either way, for me, I could just see Roy Jones Jr. The Chris Eubank Jr. of old, where he was pretty much mimicking, in some ways, his dad's style. He pretty much abandoned that, and now he's gone with the Roy Jones Jr. style. Is that going to be a good thing? Well, time will tell. Obviously, there's only ever going to be one Roy Jones Jr., of course, absolute legend. But either way, very, very dominant performance. Wasn't hard to score that fight at all, really, was it? I mean, arguably, you could give Marcus Morrison a round, maybe 2, because Chris Eubank Jr., he did take his foot off the gas. He did go on the wonders for a little while, and he wasn't too busy in that at times. One thing I would say about Chris Eubank Jr. in this one is his defence is a little bit leaky. It's a little bit leaky. If he was to go in there fighting that kind of way against Triple G, he could find himself in all kinds of trouble. He's got a very good chin, but nobody has a chin that is unbreakable. Nobody. But of course, Marcus Morrison was on the back foot, whereas Triple G is going to be on him from the opening bell until whenever the fight ends. He's just going to be dogging him down. So it's going to be Chris Eubank Jr. on the back foot. So, of course, his style against Triple G, if, of course, that fight comes off next, is going to be totally, totally different. But either way, we'll have to wait and see what moves Kalle Sauerland and Chris Eubank Jr., Roy Jones Jr., of course, work out for his next fight, or at least the next couple of fights. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, very solid performance. I think it'd be clear to see that he's got, if there was any kind of ring rust, he's got it off him. And of course, him adapting and trying the things in this fight that he's been working with Roy Jones Jr. Hopefully now they can look at that, build on it, and move forward. And I'm sure they will. Either way, very good performance by Chris Eubank Jr. Drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you on the next video.